Our mouth waters the moment we think of tasty food, and also when we get the refreshing smell of the food. Where is saliva produced? Does saliva play any role in the process of digestion? You will get to understand about all these details in this video. You will understand whether saliva is needed for digestion. Saliva is released from the salivary glands and begins chemical digestion of starches. Saliva contains the enzyme salivary amylase, which breaks down starches into simpler carbohydrates. Saliva also moistens and lubricates the food, making it easier to swallow. And exactly, that is its function. Now, as I told you, saliva is produced by the three pairs of salivary glands in the mouth, called the parotid gland, the sublingual gland, and the submandibular gland. Now you know from where the saliva is produced. It is produced by the three pairs of salivary glands in the mouth. And that's how your mouth waters when you see tasty food, when you smell food, when you think of food. The saliva secreted from the salivary glands contains mucus and also enzymes like salivary amylase and lysozyme. Now let's see these functions. The mucus, it makes the food slimy so that it is easy to swallow. Lysozyme, you know the reason, the function, because you have already studied about lysozyme in your 8th standard. What does it do? It destroys the germs that enter the body through food. Salivary amylase, it partially converts starch to maltose, which is a simpler form of sugar. Now, imagine that you are having rice. You might have even tasted this way too earlier. See, when you were chewing rice for a certain time without adding curry, you felt the sweet taste. What is the chemistry behind that sweet taste? The answer is very simple. When the food is continuously chewed, the salivary amylase in the saliva converts starch in the food into water-soluble sugar called maltose. And this sugar is the reason for the sweet taste. Now, let's see how the food passes through the esophagus, which is the food pipe. The partially digested food from the mouth enters the esophagus through the pharynx. Pharynx is nothing but the throat, a cavity within the throat that serves as an air and food passage. Now it is from the pharynx itself that the windpipe, that is trachea, also begins. Now, you will be wondering, how does the food we swallow enter the esophagus properly without entering the trachea? Correct? That will be solved by looking into this picture. Let's study mode of swallowing food. When you swallow the food, you will be thinking, it's just a simple process. But it's not exactly like that. There are a few steps through which the swallowing of the food is completed. First, the tongue compresses the food into balls with the help of the palate. Palate is the roof of the mouth. Next, what happens? The uvula. Uvula closes the nasal cavity that opens to the pharynx. Now this uvula could be seen when you open your mouth wide open and look into the mirror. There is a hanging inside the mouth, an extension that is called the uvula. So what does the uvula do? It closes the nasal cavity that opens to the pharynx. That is the second step. Now, the third step is the trachea. It tilts up and it is closed by the epiglottis. Epiglottis is a structure of the body that hangs down the windpipe. Okay, that's the trachea. Now, when you are having your food and your epiglottis is not functioning properly, what happens? You choke or cough while eating. So the function of epiglottis is to close the trachea and thereby blocking the entry of food into the windpipe, that is the trachea. Now the fourth point is the posterior part of the tongue allows the food to move over the epiglottis into the esophagus, and thus the food from the mouth travels through the esophagus and reaches the stomach. The food, it doesn't simply reach the stomach. The food from the pharynx enters to the esophagus. Food moves through the esophagus as a result of the contraction of the involuntary muscles in the esophagus. This wave-like movement is called peristalsis. This movement takes place throughout in the alimentary canal, only in one direction. So, the food never comes back into the mouth of a person who is consuming food. Food reaches the stomach within 8 seconds. So, what is peristalsis? Food moves through the esophagus as a result of the contraction of the involuntary muscles in the esophagus. This involuntary, rhythmic, wave-like contractions which help the food to move through the digestive tract is called peristalsis. Swallowing and peristalsis. Let's see how these processes are done. In the mouth cavity, food is chewed into small pieces by the teeth and mixed with saliva. The tongue rolls the food into a soft mass called a bolus. During swallowing, the tongue rises to push the bolus towards the pharynx. The soft palate, that is the uvula, moves up to prevent the bolus from entering the nasal cavity. The epiglottis also lowers to cover the opening to the trachea, that is the windpipe. This prevents the bolus from entering the trachea. The bolus enters the esophagus, that is the food pipe. The wall of the esophagus consists of circular muscles and longitudinal muscles. When the bolus enters the esophagus, the circular muscles behind it contract and the longitudinal muscles relax. At the same time, the circular muscles in front of the bolus relax and the longitudinal muscles contract. These actions push the bolus down the esophagus to the stomach. This alternate contraction and relaxation of the muscles produces a wave-like movement called peristalsis.